welcome everybody this evening. We have an interesting guest speaker tonight, and we also have an interesting interviewer in Jose. So Jeffrey Olsen is our guest, and I've had a chance to converse with Jeff on a couple of occasions. I think we met in Philadelphia, didn't we, Jeff, initially? Maybe 3 years ago.
Yeah, it's been about 3 years already.
It's about the same time that I met Jose, so that was kind of and Daniel for that matter. So it was a propitious weekend. I want to thank everybody for being here. We have some other events that are coming up. I specifically want to point out the one on the 29th. We're going to have Robin Foy, who's a notable individual. Mark, you want to make a couple comments about him? Because you're going to be the interviewer for Robin.
Sure. Robin is going to be speaking to us from Spain. He's going to be the first person from Europe that'll be speaking at a Consciousness Cafe presentation. And he and his wife, Sandra, and another couple in the 1990s, they spent 5 years doing physical mediumship, which is different from mental mediumship, where you have someone who's conversing with people in the afterlife. Physical mediumship is actually where you see lights, you can see beings manifested, you can see objects manifested. And they actually did a lot of experiments in the 1990s with an event they called the Skull Experiment. And it was really very fascinating, but also very significant, because a lot of the things that they did weren't done before. And there was a team of people in the spirit world working with them to help do audio communications without a medium and video communications without a medium as well. And Robin and his wife are in the process of opening a new center in Antequera, Andalusia, Spain. And that'll be starting up in July. And he's going to talk about that as well. But the things that he did in the 1990s with a skull experiment, he's going to be carrying on and actually doing more than what he did before. So it's going to be a really exciting interview. And listening to Robin, he's very talkative and he gives you a lot of history. He's been doing this for about 40 years with he and his wife. And so there's a lot of stories he can tell. And a lot of people in the US aren't familiar with the skull experiment, but it was one of the most significant paranormal parapsychology experiments that had been done in the last 20 years. And there were 3 scientists from the Society for Psychical Research in London who spent 36 sessions over 2 years checking them out to see if what they were doing was fraudulent or hoaxing, and they couldn't find it. And they actually wrote a big report about it as well. Sorry to take up so much time, but I'm really excited about that one.
Good practice for your introduction next week.
There you go.
Yeah.
I'm looking at 3 of the 5 of us have hats on. Maybe I ought to go downstairs and put a hat on myself.
I'm rooting for the Jazz in the playoffs, so I've got my Jazz hat on today.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, Jeff and Jose have both had near-death experiences, and it should be an interesting conversation to have them compare notes, talk about their experiences. I'll turn it over to you, Jose, and look forward to listening in on your conversation.
Yeah, I just want to start by saying it's an honor to interview Jeff. In the years that I've known him, I think we've become quite close and have great respect for the kind of awakening he's bringing into this world where NDEs are becoming more of a household term instead of something that's like taboo. And I think one of the things we share is that we had our NDEs quite a bit back. I believe yours was in 1997, Jeff. Maybe you might want to, I know every time I remember it is a very painful experience for me. So I can't imagine how it must be for you, but if you could share a little bit, that would be great. And we could start off with that.
Yeah,
Before we get too far into it, let me make a quick comment. If during this presentation people have questions, we will have a question and answer period after the discussion. If you want to put questions into the chat room, you're welcome to do that. Otherwise, when we're ready, you can raise your hand and you'll have a chance to personally pose your questions. Now, either use the chat or later you can pose questions personally. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you, Jim. I'm having a hard time hearing on my end. I don't know if everyone's muted. Oh, there it goes. Now it's quiet. Perfect. But well, thank you, Jose. And yeah, I'll go into this briefly. My near death or out of body experience was the result of an automobile accident. I had a horrific car crash. The whole family was in the car, and at the time, what happened to me was both of my legs were crushed. My left leg was amputated above the knee. My back was damaged. My rib cage was damaged. My lungs were collapsing. My left shoulder was banged up with an AC separation. And then my right arm was nearly pulled off, everything through the rotator cuff and all the muscle. And then the seatbelt cut through me and ruptured my intestines. I was not in good shape physically, and this is why I believe my soul left the body. Now, the more devastating part of this accident is my wife and youngest son were both killed instantly in the accident. So in a split second, everything I knew and loved and was living was gone. And I was aware of that at the scene. It was a horrible, when Jose said painful to remember, yes. I was driving the car. There was tremendous guilt because I think I may have dozed off or overcorrected. Something happened and I lost control of the car and it rolled. It rolled down the road, not off the road. So it rolled probably 6 to 8 times, the accident reports say. And that's just the worst hell a man could be in. I mean, here I am trapped. I can't move. I know I'm losing consciousness. I'm aware that my wife and child are deceased. My oldest son, who was only 7 at the time, is crying in the back seat, but I cannot get to him. I'm pinned. I can tell by the cry, however, that he's okay, or that he appears to be okay. It was in that darkest moment that I had the beginning of this near-death experience. I mean, I left the body. And when I say that, I didn't understand what was going on. Here I was in this horrific situation, and I felt light come. It's like light came and surrounded me. Light was comforting me, and it felt as if I was rising above the scene of the accident, but suddenly I could breathe, that the pain was gone, and I was literally confused, thinking, wow, how can I be okay? What's going on here? And it was in that moment, in that light, that Tamara, my wife, who I knew was deceased at the scene, she came and was with me, and she was gorgeous. She wasn't banged up as she had been in the car crash. She was absolutely radiant. And she was communicating to me and telling me, you can't come, you've got to go back. And we had a conversation about Spencer, my oldest son, my surviving son, and I was to return and to be his father and to raise that boy. And yet Tamara was going to move on. Now, I have no concept of time in this light, this holding place. I later found out people arrived at the scene. They had to extricate me from the car. I was life flighted or airlifted to the nearest level 1 trauma center. I knew none of that. All I knew is I had crashed the car. Half the family was killed. I said the most profound goodbye I'll ever say. And then as I made the choice to come back, I found myself wandering through the hospital, moving about, seeing the doctors, the nurses, the patients. And that was a profound experience as well, because I was seeing them different than I'd ever seen anyone in my life. I mean, I was seeing everything about them. They were me and I was them. There was a oneness. There was a connection. And gosh, it was so infused with love until I came to my own body, which I barely recognized because it was so beat up. but I knew I was to get back in it. And I mean, there was profound insights around all of these things. I've outlined this in my book, Knowing, in great detail. I'm going to be very brief tonight for the sake of conversation. But anyway, I had to get back in the body. And I was in the hospital for like 5.5 months and had 18 surgeries putting me back together. This is what Jose and I share in common. We spent a lot of time in the hospital, and we were very, very sick, touch and go. I mean, I was in ICU, I was ventilated, there was horrific infections, I was throwing pulmonary emboli, the blood clots that lodge in your lungs. There was a lot going on, and I don't know that that door to this out-of-body or near-death experience ever really shut.
Right. And I agree with you there. I think once we open that door, we can't close it back fully. There's always something, some connectivity that we have, or maybe a sense of kind of going back home, because in that space, we have so many loved ones that now kind of kick up their feet and call that home there. When you had your initial out of body, where you realized that you were communicating with Tamara and you were like speaking about your duty, like you need to come back, you have a responsibility. I remember that being so difficult because I really didn't want to come back. It was a very difficult decision to kind of say, okay, how, and this is a deep question, but how is it that you found that resilience, that strength, that hopefulness that abandons you instantly when that happens, when it first happens, to kind of come back and say, okay, I know you're going to be okay over here, and I love you so much, and I know I'm going to be back, to come back here and kind of like make that decision that you're going to be in that hospital for 5.5 months, and you're going to go through all this pain so you could, keep your side of that promise. To me, that was a promise. So how was that?
Well, it was difficult. I mean, that's very true. If it weren't for the love of a father and his son, I mean, knowing that Spencer, my 7-year-old, was okay,
right,
or was going to be okay, that was the motivator. Otherwise, Jose, I don't know that I would have come back. Otherwise, I don't know that I'd still be here. But that love of a father for his son and my love for Spencer, and knowing that, gosh, I'm going to go be this child's father, I'm not going to leave him orphaned. That was the motivation that got me through not only coming back and leaving those realms and saying the goodbyes, but also for those long months and years after the fact, dealing with it. Because the physical torture was one thing, and in some ways still is. I still deal with a great deal of pain based on the injuries, but the emotional trauma was far deeper. That was far deeper. And yet having this child and knowing, gosh, I'm here to raise and love him as only a father can, that was the catalyst.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's a beautiful thing. And so you kind of reboot and you start your life over, and there's gaps that we can't refill. Those will be, when we move on, then we'll be able to kind of fill those gaps once again. But how did you kind of find yourself being strong enough to say, you know what, it's even okay for me to love again. It's even okay for me to make a new life. This is what Tamara would have wanted. And did she communicate in any way any of that to you, so that you kind of had her blessing in a way?
Yeah, she did. And that's the other thing. I mean, when we say people die or they're lost, that they're not, they're still connected. And when I say the door never really shut, she continues even now to be a great influence, a great guardian. And when I had realized I was having feelings for Tanya, my current wife, and I didn't date, I wasn't looking. Tanya fell into my life as almost a miracle as well. And I had guilt around that. How can I be having feelings for someone else? I'll never love again. That'll never work. And Tamara did. She came to me. In fact, the situation is I had gone to the cemetery, and I was laying on the lawn, sobbing on her grave. And I suppose, Jose, I was picking a fight. I'm like, how dare you? How could you leave me? How could you go and be in that beautiful place? And here I am limping around on a cane, attempting to raise our son. How dare you? I was angry and emotional about it. And I swear that day she came to me. I felt her there. I didn't see her, but I felt her come as I hollered and cried into the lawn on her gravesite. And I felt her hands on my shoulders, and she communicated very clearly. And she said, "Don't berate me. I loved you enough to leave." And I'm like, what? How could you love me enough to leave? And there was this, whenever those realms, whenever that veil, if you will, lifts, there's this clear communication, this clarity. And it was almost like I knew as she was saying, "Don't you remember we made a deal? I would have loved nothing more than to stay and grow old with you, but your soul had a different journey. You would not be the man you are today if you had not walked that path, if you had not experienced that. And I loved you enough to leave and support your soul's journey. So don't holler at me and yell at me." Of course, I said at that point, "Yeah, but I'm having feelings for another woman." And she actually laughed. And she said, "Of course you are. I know who you are. You weren't meant to be alone." And there was no jealousy or anything like that. In fact, she communicated that she had orchestrated Tanya and I's paths crossing, that she was looking from beyond and orchestrating this meeting, and that my feelings were completely, normal and supported by her. I mean, gosh, I realize what a gift that is. Not everybody gets these type of experiences, but she told me in that instance to choose joy. She said, "Look, it's a choice. You have choice in all of this, but I want you to choose joy." And in fact, she shared that I'd been holding her hostage in my grief, that she could not be happy without me moving into joy and making decisions that would bring more joy and stability in my life. And Spencer, again, my son, she's like, that kid deserves a mom. You're a good dad, but you're a lousy mom. Let's see if we can't create a different situation.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess when you have this experience, it's common for us to feel these type of communications, right? And they become like the norm. So I just want people to understand that out there that seems to be something that's very common amongst experiencers, so Jeff, I recall an instant where you were able to hold your son again. And that breaks my heart. That has to be one of the most beautiful moments that I've ever heard someone relay. If you wouldn't mind sharing a bit of that speaks to everything we could ever imagine when we think about love, when we think about moving on, when we think about anything that is good and positive in any way. That moment just puts it right in your face, and there's no way you could deny it.
Oh, Jose, my dear brother, I would be glad to share that with you and with the group. And I'm going to share some things I don't often talk about because of our relationship and other things. When the car crashed, Griffin, my youngest son, who was just a toddler, he was only 14 months old. His car seat had broken apart, and he had been ejected from the car. And I was aware of that even at the scene of the accident. Where is my boy? Where is he? What happened? And it's almost as if Spirit told me then, he's gone. And that's a strange dichotomy, because at first I thought, oh my gosh, how can that be? And then in the same breath, it's like, oh good, he's not torn apart on the side of the road somewhere like I am right now. But I knew at the scene that he had passed. But see, in all the communications, in these visitations, in these things with Tamara, Griffin was never there. I was haunted for those months thinking, well, what about my little boy? What about my little boy? It wasn't until the end of my hospital stay. And I think that's significant, because the two most profound, like out-of-body experiences or near-death experiences were at the scene of the accident, before any narcotics or anything had happened in the hospital. And at the end of my hospital stay, when I was off of all of the morphine or any heavy, painkillers, or I was taking some Tylenol, as they had done, some work with this shoulder, and I was actually just weeks from going home. I was about 10 days from returning home when I had this profound experience that you're referring to. I was finally able to lay on my side. They had stabilized my intestinal ruptures. They had put a colostomy bag on, and I was finally able to lay on my side in the rehabilitation wing. And I had laid on my back so long, I had rubbed all the hair off the back of my head. The back of my head was bald. But this was the situation as I rolled over one night, and I fell asleep. I naturally sleep on my side, and I was finally comfortable, and I thought, wow, I am sleeping. I remember being aware of sleeping, and then I felt that light come again. Just like at the scene of the accident, that light came and surrounded me, and I was still grieving bitterly. I mean, my younger brother was there with me that night, and he actually said, I'll sit with you till you fall asleep, because he knew I didn't sleep well. I was still so gutted from all that, the emotional grief. The physical stuff, I was getting better, the emotional grief. Well, as that light came, it felt as if I was raising from the hospital bed, except this time the light dispensed and went away. It cleared, and I was in the most extraordinary place. Beautiful. And I began to run, and it was such a physical experience. It was beyond physical. It was sensual. I could feel the ground under my feet. I could feel the energy and the intelligence charging through my calves and thighs of both legs as I joyfully ran. And I was gleefully thinking, and it's funny, I've heard people refer to it as heaven or the other side or the spirit world. The only word that even comes close to what I was experiencing is I was home. I was home. I was running, and I was home, and I was joyfully experiencing this. And then I realized I wasn't there to stay. It was just a knowing. And at that same time, there was this kind of corridor off to my left, and I knew intuitively I'm to go this way. And I did. I began working my way down the corridor. And at the end of the corridor was a crib, a child's crib. And Griffin had been sleeping in a crib still at the time of his passing. And I raced to the crib. And when I looked in, there was my little boy. There was my son. And he was sleeping beautifully. In fact, I picked him up. I picked him up and held him. And I don't know if you've ever picked up a sleeping child, but there's a heat and a weight to them. And he was soft. I mean, I was befuddled, because I'm like, how can I be experiencing this in such a physical way? I could feel his body against mine, even though I realized I'm out of the body, but I could feel it. in a very physical way, and I could feel him breathing. I even felt his breath on my neck. And I leaned over and I smelled his hair. I mean, the smell of it. I thought, this is him. This is my little boy. And I began to weep, thinking, I'm holding him. And he's fine. He's safe. He's sleeping. He's comfortable. And he was sleeping like a nap. It wasn't he's sleeping because he's deceased. He was having a beautiful nap. And I held him and I began to weep. And I felt this profound presence coming up behind me. And then the guilt began to come up, because this presence was so big, so powerful, so cosmic. So, I mean, I grew up in a conservative Christian home, and my thoughts were, wow, that's God. That's God. And the guilt began to come up because I thought, my little boy's here because I crashed the car. My little boy's life was cut short because I lost control and screwed up and wrecked. And the guilt began to bubble up as this presence is coming closer and closer. And I'm weeping, holding my boy. And as the presence came so close, I had the thought, I hope I can be forgiven. And that's when the lid just came off. When I say the lid, it was like a download. When I had that thought, I felt those divine arms, and this almost felt physical too. They wrapped around and just hugged me and my son. And then there was this downpouring of love, unconditional love, wisdom, seeing, knowing. I was holding my boy, weeping, having this thought, I hope I can be forgiven. And the first message that came in is, there's nothing to forgive. Everything is in perfect divine order. And I began to see my life. I had, I suppose, what you would refer to as the life review. I saw everything that had happened. I saw my brothers. I saw the wreck. I saw the relationships. I saw my insecurities. I saw things that I was classifying as mistakes or things I did wrong, and I knew they were wrong and I did them anyway. But in those loving arms, I was told there are no mistakes. And as I looked at my life and passed judgment, I was told that's your judgment, not ours. And the profound thing about this is, here I am holding my son. And this divine being who I call God is saying, see how much you love him? See how perfect he is to you? That's how you are to us. You're perfect, divine, beautiful. And so this love from a divine source was magnified as it went through my love for my own child, and then it rippled all the way back up. And it was a very personal experience, but I realized that was true of each and every one of us, that we are so beloved, we are so divine, we are so perfect in the eyes of the divine. And I had this overwhelming, unconditional love in such a way that it changed me forever. Now, I'll wrap up, but I was also taught about choice. You know, when I talk about Tamara saying, choose joy, this divine creator told me I had a choice, that I could be mad at God my whole life because my family passed and something was allowed to go wrong. I could beat myself up my whole life because I was driving the car and I could be guilty for that. Or I was told I could exercise my will. I could infuse my will into the situation. Now that confused me with my upbringing, because I said, well, God, I thought it was your will be done. And this is what was communicated. I was told, your will is my will. That's how much we love you. What do you want? And I was told, you can give your son. You can exercise your will and give your son, and therefore have some role in this. I knew he was deceased. I knew he was passed. I knew he was there. And this was a visit. But in all that love and beauty, I chose to kiss my little boy and give him back. And exercise my will to let go and to trust and to know he was safe. And then I woke up back in the hospital bed, but with some different insights. Now, I still grieved miserably for a decade, you know, over all that had happened, but I realized that we have choice. I realized that things are in divine order. I realized that life is not a test, that life's an absolute gift. I thought God was testing me all the time. And it's like, no, your life is your creation. The entire universe supports it. And we love you. And every moment of every day is a gift if you're willing to accept it that way.
It's quite an amazing story. It's deeply touching. And I think one of the things that I think we both came out of that experience with was that one of the biggest things that I brought back, and I think I heard you say the same thing, was that the ability to forgive, and not forgiving others, more about something that we rarely do in life: forgive ourselves. And that was a profound lesson for me, and as I could tell, one for you. And in terms of judging, you know, how we feel empowered to do that. And we have no idea. So when somebody looks at Jeff, they like, no idea what happened to Jeff. Somebody looks at Jose, no idea what happened to these guys. Yet people will judge, you know, and you reminded me of a line that we use in our culture. And the line is a very simple line. It simply says, what's in the way is the way. And I think that's what you were speaking to right now, in terms of, you know, there is no wrong. You know, whatever we do, that's what it is. That's the right way. And actually the only way. So I find that pretty intense. So if we were going to give advice, if Jeff was going to give somebody advice about how to push through the tough times, how to get past all these moments that we find are so, that break us, you know, that we have nothing to look forward to, you know, that we just feel so in despair, what would you say? What would you tell people?
Wow. You ask good questions, Jose. I mean, I would remind them that it's a choice, you know, that we're simply here to learn and ask, what am I learning from this? You know, what am I learning? And also, and this might sound strange, do something for someone else. You know, when I was in my gut of pain often, and I would be in that dark night of despair, if I could do something for someone else, somehow I would feel better. Somehow it would ease my pain if I could just serve another. And so that's, you know, that's something that's worked for me. I mean, life experiences are so individual and so unique. I don't know. I can tell you what works for me. I don't have anyone else's answers, but to be still and listen for that guidance. But often you'll have a thought, gosh, maybe I'll call my mom. You know, I haven't talked to mom in a week. It can be very little things to do for someone else. And that was good for me.
Yeah, I think that's a really good answer, because I believe that we're here to serve. That's the only role we have here. We serve one another. We don't only serve our family and friends. We serve, you know, just by opening the door for someone or letting someone in front of you. I think that's what we're all about, you know, and I think that sense of love that we're able to gift people with, you know, you found a way to harness it again and kind of gift Tanya with it and create something worthwhile, you know, where most people would just, you know, take their hat and toss it in and say, I quit, you know. So, you know, in terms of that, your new life and going forward, how has that experience influenced your new relationships?
Oh, that's interesting, because having had the experience, here's what shifted in a big way is judgments and comparisons just went out the window. I no longer looked at anyone. And I mean, I used to be judgmental. It's like, well, they probably brought that on themselves, or they made a bad choice or whatever. So judgments and comparisons went out the window, and that was really beneficial for me to love at a deeper level. Also, I think I just embraced the miracles in little things. People will even say to me, gosh, you must have been spared for some great cause. And I'm like, yeah, to play catch with my son, or to hold Tanya's hand, or watch one more sunset. Those little things are the big things.
Yep.
And by embracing that, wow, how does that grass feel under my foot, even if I have just one? I mean, the beautiful, beautiful miracles in the everyday, ordinary things is where I've focused to function and to be grateful and to keep going, right?
That's rich. That's rich, because I think the experience heightens our awareness, but not in terms of like a lot of what people seek, just in terms of simplicity, in terms of wondering, how does that tree take a breath of air?
Mm-hmm.
How does Mother Earth nurture me? How does she create this incredible display of beauty for me to see? And I think that that awareness gets rich, even though we lost something.
Mm-hmm.
But we both know we didn't. But the perception of other people is, wow, you lost. And I think we don't see it as we lost anything at all. We feel like we've been given gifts. And, it's easy for me to tell people I got a gift, right? Because I came back and people say, well, you got a second chance. But despite your coming back, most people still look at it, oh man, he lost his wife, he lost his baby, And it's still, I mean, I know where they are, so I find great beauty in that and great peace and calm. But when you had your experience, Jeff, did you get a sense of, I had a sense where everything that I knew fell apart. I didn't believe in God. I didn't believe in a lot of things. So all of a sudden to be in this place and I'm living dead was just so profound. It destroyed everything that I didn't believe in, if that makes any sense. Now, all of a sudden I came back and I said, wow, there is a spirit. There is this, there is that. And we move on. How is that for you?
It's interesting because I believed in a creator. I believed in a life after even. But belief is way different than experience. That's why I titled the book Knowing. It's like I was held in the arms of God. Wow. And yet all of the things I believed were turned inside out and upside down, as you've pointed out.
Right.
And yet in such a beautiful way. It's almost like my beliefs or my faith was literally transformed into trust. It's like, wow. And in all that trust was this love. It's like life is a gift, and I'm simply, my soul's expanding in perfect ways. And that's not to say it isn't challenging. I mean, I don't want anyone to think that I had this horrific accident, this incredible bereavement, and then I had these profound experiences and I was okay. No, I had a horrible accident. I had profound experiences, but I grieved as miserably as any man grieves. And I waded through all that. It's simply that I choose to speak of what I have rather than what I lost. I choose to speak of the blessings rather than what we judge as curses. The interesting thing is the curses are the blessings in hindsight in many, many many ways, but it's, you know, it did change my consciousness, I suppose, to operate in a form of gratitude rather than in a form of pity. And that was a big shift.
Yeah, that's well said, Jeff. Well, I guess this is why I feel so honored to be speaking to you. You know, it reminds me of, you know, I had seen a movie one time. I think it was called Jacob's Ladder. And I remember one of the angels speaking to this man who was going through this experience of dying and saying, you know, the demons are really angels. And until you see them for what they really are, you'll be fearful and they will be demons to you. So somehow, I guess that experience just breaks that kind of wall, and we begin to see what we would call more clarity. I don't know. And I think it's just pretty profound that we kind of move from one thing to another. And it's pretty crazy that you know, what I looked as evil, what I looked at was wrong, was never so right. And that's exactly what you're saying. And if someone that, you know, when we look at people that grieve and things like that, you know, I still grieve. We don't stop not grieving. We're still human.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes people might have a hard time understanding that. You know, well, damn, you had this crazy experience. You were with God, you were with the Creator. And yeah, that's true. But I'm here now. And I'm still human, and I have these human emotions that still drive a part of who I am. You know, how do you respond to that? I mean, I have a hard time sometimes responding and saying, look, I wouldn't wish what happened to me on anyone. And I'm sure you probably feel the same way, but, you know, how would you describe that?
No, well, we're here to have the human experience. We are divine beings having a human experience. I often say we bought the ticket to the full feature film, you know, and we wanted the candy and the popcorn and the big drink, but we're going to get the sticky floor and maybe some gum under the chair at the same time. You know, it's funny you refer to this, you know, this film. I remember seeing, and I still love this film, but it's a silly film maybe, but there's an old film called City of Angels. It's with Nicolas Cage and Meg Ryan.
Right.
And the first time I saw that after having the experience, and Nicolas Cage is an angel that visits this realm and assists other people, but he chooses to have the experience. He's like, I'm going to fall and dive in, you know, and I was sitting in the theater watching that film and I wept. I think people wondered what was up. I wept as he took the dive, as he chose, because I realized from my perspective, that's what we all did. We were all these divine beings that said, I'm going to dive in, and yet we judge it as a fall, and yet were we not rising to something greater? You know, and that's what he did it for love, and he experienced love in a physical, beautiful way, and then it was lost suddenly. But anyway, I don't mean to sit and weave things into a film, but it was so profound, and that's how I would answer it, is yes, we're here for the full human experience with the joy and the pain, the grief and the beauty. We're here to experience all of it, and that's the gift. We get to have the breadth and depth of the human experience, knowing that we're divine. We'll go back. I promise you, Jose, someday we're going to sit down in those other realms, and we might even do it here. We might even create heaven right here. And we'll hug each other and we'll laugh and we'll say, wasn't that a trip, brother? I mean, what, wow. And you did that to me. And then she left, and then we had that experience, and we'll literally joyfully laugh and say, boy, did we learn. What a beautiful way to learn. And when those tough things happen, I just say, okay, what is the universe teaching me now? You know?
Yeah. And I think it's beautiful you use that movie. it was that was a difficult movie for me. I know I cry like a baby after my near-death experience, so I just call myself a big baby now. But I think what's important about what you just said is, and maybe what people need to get. Jeff just said something that was crucial, and we are that angel. We are that Nicolas Cage that makes that leap, and that's trust, that's faith, that's love, and feel the sting of what this life is and embrace it in a gracious way and with the eyes of love. And he's going to bring that back with him, because he will be back with her, and I think that's really what the near-death experience is about. It's really something that says, you know what? You guys aren't really people. You think you're people. You guys are all angels. And one day you're going to realize that. And I think we had a bit of a preview. So, when the Creator touched you and wrapped his arms around you, I know you felt oneness. You felt oneness. It was not a separation. It was my baby. It was me. It was Creator. And we were one.
Yeah.
And I think that's really what drives us. It's really what drives us and helps us to kind of put some perspective into life and look at it through that lens. And I think that's, I have to say, you've had one of the most profound experiences. It touches me so deep, because one of the things that I had always an issue in my life was losing something. I don't like loss. I don't like endings, right? And so some movies that have these really heavy endings kind of touch you for a while. And I would say to myself, this is why I don't like endings, right? Yet, I think what the experience put in my face was, you know what? There really aren't any endings. They're just transformations. And we're going to go through those together. And how do you want to look at them now? And I know you don't look at your experience as an ending. I know your little guy is with you. I know Pamela's with you. You know that. How do we drive that concept into the minds and hearts of others?
I don't know that we drive it. I think we be it. We just be it. If I want to experience love and forgiveness and peace, then I better be that love and that forgiveness and that peace, and that will ripple out. I mean, there's free will, and we're all going to choose our own path. I suppose just being love will create love, and that's that. I don't know that I have a profound answer for that question, Jose, but I don't know that there's an agenda to drive it or convince or to make it. Let's just be it. Let's just be it, and watch how that ripples out and see what happens.
That's beautiful, Jeff. I love the way you said that, because I truly believe that.
I know you do. I know you do. I know you are.
I gotta say, one time I was at a sweat, and there was a bit of a discussion with some of the elders, and one of the elders looked at me, and he said, Jose, no is a legitimate answer. Mm-hmm. I'm looking at him like, what? No, that can't be. But I think what he meant was that life isn't what I imagined. Life is what it is. Yeah. And it is this beautiful opportunity to experience something that I truly believe when I was on that other side, I will not be able to experience the way I experienced it here. We do have that profound love, that sense of oneness and all that. But like you said, when you held your baby and you felt that skin against your skin and the breath against your neck, I mean, it made it physical.
Yeah.
And the only way that you could comprehend physicality was to be physical. And I think that those are some really, we hit on some really heavy things here. I hope that the audience out there is really appreciating this opportunity to hear this tremendous wisdom coming from this dear man, who I would say has a heart of gold, people. You know, and I think he's so free and willing to share that with the world. And I think that's a beautiful thing. Jim, I don't know if I'm going overboard or how much time we got left. Are we doing good?
We're doing well. It's been a fascinating conversation between the two of you.
Yeah.
But we can move into the Q&A period. I see we have one individual. I've got a couple of questions that I want to pose.
Yeah.
But
I want to say one thing. I want to say one thing to Jose before we go to questions, and that is this. You only see in others what exists within yourself, my friend. You are so complimentary, and thank you. But I'm simply a mirror to who and what you are. And you exemplify and inspire me with all those same things you're saying about me. So thank you.
Thank you. And I think that's, you know, I gotta say, I think when we look at others, we see spirit.
Yeah. And
I think that's something that is going to ultimately change this world. I think we're all going to come to there and all be there. I just want to mention one thing before I kind of kick off here and let Jim go with the question. But Jeff and I will be starting a new show hopefully soon. I think that it's going to be called Salt and Pepper. You know, we'll be debuting this thing pretty soon.
I'm Salt. I'm Salt, if anyone's wondering.
I'm going to be the pepper. And I think it's going to be great fun and hopefully uplifting and, you know, get some good info out there, but mostly inspire people to feel good about themselves. And I think that's what we're after. Anyway, it was a great talk, my dear friend. I'm going to let Jim take over, and I'm just going to hang with you guys for a little while and listen to these answers and questions.
Yeah, Jose, maybe some people want to pose some questions to you as well. So, so the way to pose a question, there are a couple ways. You can go down to the chat and put a comment in. You can raise your hand as a participant. We have one individual who's raised his hand, Bill Lenfesty. So Bill, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself and pose your question. Bill, you still there? I think we had this problem last time. You might have stepped away from. There he is. Go ahead, Bill.
Video or does that matter?
Bill, can you get a little closer to your microphone? We can't hear you.
Okay. Is that better?
That's better.
Is that better now? Okay. First of all, Jose, when you guys start your new show, can you send Jim or whoever it is alerts or to pass along as to when that's going to be so we can get involved with that?
Yeah, we'd love to do that. It'd be our pleasure.
Jeff, the question I've got is, before you came on, we were discussing some other stuff and how some people who are involved with research are trying to make sure that the experiences aren't, hoaxes or misinterpreted or whatever. Did you ever have the feeling that, or did you ever wonder, is this really real, or am I just imagining stuff? Or was it just pretty much so overwhelming that you didn't have any questions with it? Because it would freak me out. I've never had anything like that happen to me. And I would think it's like a different kind of reality, and it's almost so overwhelming that it'd be hard to take it in. Did that ever?
Yeah, it did. It did. I mean, and there was times I thought, well, I mean, I knew it was real. It was so real. In fact, the crazy thing was this was the foggy, nonsensical dream. Suddenly that was real in clarity. But, and I think he's been with you. I had one of the attending ER physicians in the facility that they life flighted me into, Dr. Jeff O'Driscoll. You know, he experienced my wife's soul in the ER room as they worked on me, which, you know, he wasn't having a near-death experience and there was no oxygen shutting down to his brain and all the things that I know science says may cause these hallucinations. You know, so there's some real evidence that, hey, gosh, you don't have to have a near-death experience to have this veil lift, if you will. But I bring him up because, you know, when he shared what he had experienced, I actually had a safe place. I thought, okay, if I'm crazy, he'll put me in the psych ward and get me the treatment I deserve to have, right? But when he was having this experience, I said, gosh, and he didn't know me from Adam when we first talked about it. But as I shared my experiences with him, I said, what if I'm just making it up? What if it's just all in my head? And, you know, and first of all, I knew it wasn't, but he said, well, if you're a divine being, is there a difference? You know, I mean, if you're experiencing it and you're hearing this voice and seeing these things, and if you're creating it and you're the divine, then what's the difference? But I did have those questions, which is why I was speaking to a medical doctor saying, am I nuts? Now, Dr. Jeff O'Driscoll is unique, and he said, no, you're not nuts at all. I see those things, and I'm not dying. I'm alive and well in the ER room. But I've met many others that have unexplainable things around it. I've seen all the scientific research of what's happening, and here again, I'm open to all possibilities. But I know for me, it was very, very real, and I can never, you know, I can never discount it, whether it was made up or not. That was my reality. And even day-to-day stuff seems like a crazy dream.
Yeah, there are a lot of books that have been written on, academic books, I guess, written on the subject of, are these real? I just finished working on an essay that addresses the survival of consciousness, and I won't go into that, but there's some interesting research out there that says this is not just a hallucination.
Yeah. I just finished, this might be a plug for Dr. Bruce Grayson, who was with the Division of Perceptual Studies. He spent 50 years as a scientific researcher on these out-of-body or near-death experiences. His book is just out. It's called After. I was reading that all last weekend, and I love reading what a researcher and scientist has to say, unemotionally attached to any of it. It's pretty interesting.
That's a good point, because in this book, he addresses the various competing theories as to how to interpret these things. And he basically concludes that there isn't any sufficient hypothesis to explain these things that holds up as well to the hypothesis that consciousness survives death. Stanley, you've got your hand raised. You want to pose the next question?
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
You can.
Yes.
Okay, I can. I'm just wondering if either you or Jeffrey were able to get any information as to what life is like on the other side, and also why is there so little interaction between those on that side and us? It's just so rare that we get people like you having near-death experiences. Why isn't there more interaction between people on the other side and people in the physical?
I think that's a beautiful question. And I don't know the actual statistics, but it's as high as like 1 in 10 people has had a out-of-body or near-death experience or encounter. It might be higher than that, Jim. You may know, but it's not as uncommon as we might think.
Here's a statistic that I read recently about after-death communications. In my experience, I come across a lot of people who have recently lost loved ones, and they share their communication they believe they received from that deceased loved one. Now, that communication comes in a lot of different ways. It's not just verbal. It could be an odor, could be some kind of sign. But the statistics say that, and I can't cite where the research was done, but 70% of people report receiving some kind of communication within about a year and a half, sometime within a year and a half of losing someone. But we don't talk about it. our culture doesn't appreciate these things. So if you can imagine 70% of people getting those kind of communications, if we could only get past the notion that there's something wrong with us, if we started sharing these things, maybe we could build up a greater appreciation, and maybe they'd start happening more frequency.
Stanley, I just want to throw one thing in there. And I think about this a lot. And I came to my own conclusion. So this is my conclusion. And I think that every time I remember my brother, my dad, someone that I've lost, I ask myself, are they reminding me? And I think it's perspective. How do we look at it? If we're looking for something physical that we could say, wow, that was them, that might be something that might be more difficult to find. But I just look at simple things, even if they loved a certain flower and all of a sudden that flower presents itself, I'm like, wow, it takes you right to them. So I just look at it like they're reminding me, they're in my life every second of every day. It just depends how I want to look for them. And I think when we look at it from mine, is a very simplistic way of looking at it, and it helps me to deal with the loss. And I find that perhaps they are the ones that are reminding me that they were here once and that they're still around, that they're not gone. And that's why we have all these memories of them, a smell, something, a place, and how they kind of, they kind of, wow, I remember them. I could smell them. And I think that's one of the more graceful things that we have in life, is the way that, it might just be a memory in my head, or it might be, wow, that I could smell them. I know it's them, or something that so reminds me of my mom, that beautiful white rose. It's just different ways of communicating from the other side. I think, to me, there's so many ways that communication is happening. It's just that maybe we're just not looking.
Yeah. That kind of leads into a question that I wanted to pose to Jeff. You had made a comment earlier about how Tamra, I think, had said to you that your grief was binding her in ways that I'd like to explore a little bit. It seems, if that's true, if for some reason her experience, what she's capable of experiencing on the other side, is being held back because of how you are so heavily grieving, then does that say that if society could get over its fear of death and start understanding these things, perhaps the experience that people have on the other side could be even broader than what they're currently experiencing?
Well, that's an interesting point, Jim. And again, it was very, very personal. What she communicated is that my grief was holding her hostage, not that the universe was holding her hostage in my grief, but that she still loved and cared about me, and watching me suffer in such a way was not allowing her to be completely joyful, in any setting either. So again, it was very personal. But I think you bring up a key point. I mean, for instance, we used to think that the near-death experience was so rare. Well, now with, cardiac arrest and defibrillation and all these things are going about, suddenly now, the medical field has advanced in such a way that a lot of people are coming back. And many of them are saying, wow, my consciousness went on even when I was perhaps pronounced dead. I think as our consciousness awakens as society, as we put away fear and embrace more love, who's to say, to Stanley's point, if those angelic realms won't be more evident, won't be more connected, won't be more communicative, simply because we're the ones holding ourselves back. We're not open to it. Or when I say we're, I'm talking humanity in general. You go into other cultures, indigenous cultures and others that are more connected to those things, and they speak in terms of, oh gosh, your Uncle Joe who past 10 years ago was walking in the woods with me today as if this is what I had for lunch. You know, I mean, it's a lot of our consciousness creates our reality. And if our consciousness expands, reality will expand as well.
That's a good point. I hope people appreciate that. The influence that we have over our reality is much greater than I think most of us realize. Hillary, you've got your hand raised.
Hey, Jeff. I first wanted to say thank you so much for sharing, being vulnerable. I know how hard that can be, even if we've said the story 1,000 times, you know. So I really appreciate that. My question for you, I've also had an out-of-body experience, not near death, but, you know, an experience that profound love and such. And then obviously coming back and also how you said that it never really goes away. That's all. It's like 100% true. It's like that. It's like you open up a little doorway in your brain and it's always, you know, it remembers that it's there. So sometimes, you know, I will struggle with those feelings of being half there and half here. But yeah, sorry. So the question would be, you know, you mentioned how, you know, being here is a gift. And you know, that we choose to come here for love and things like that. In your opinion, what would you say makes being human a gift? What makes it better to be here than to be in the universal consciousness?
You know, I wouldn't say it's any better. I would say it's different. And in many ways, I believe we're experiencing what we're not, that we might more fully embrace what we truly are, that universal love, that universal consciousness. And yet, even when I was on the other side, I was still me. I was still unique and individual in all there is. And in many ways, this, what we refer to as a lower level, or this heavy, you know, mortality and these things, I'm not so sure that it's any lower or heavier. This is a bad sports analogy, Hillary, so forgive me, but I was a Division I athlete once upon a time, and we would sit in the locker room, and I played football, and they'd put all the X's and O's on the chalkboard, and they would talk about what was going to happen, and everything was laid out, right? And we thought, wow, that looks great. Let's go do that. But we had no concept of what it meant until we were on the field and realizing how strong the resistance was from the other guy or the other team or whatever goes. But I think in many ways we sit in that universal consciousness. This is the point of the analogy. And we draw X's and O's and we say, oh, I want to learn that. I want to experience that. We have no idea how difficult it is until we get here and actually do it. But boy, then after we've done it, we're like, oh my gosh, now I know. You know, now I know. And the crazy thing, I believe, about our divine, you know, nature, we probably say, hey, let's do it again. Let's go back in the game and do it again. You know, we're bruised and battered, but I want to go experience this now, or I want to be that type of a consciousness, or I want to have this happen to me so that I can more fully embrace what it means to be all of it, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, better or not, I mean, we're here, and I believe we've chosen to be here, and I'm going to make the most of it. I'm going to embrace life in the body, and I feel it'll more fully allow me to embrace life as the collective consciousness too.
Yes, thank you.
I have another question for you, Jeff. I've read a lot of books by very experienced out-of-body people, and they talk about going to different realms beyond this physical realm that we're in right now. And sometimes those realms they go into provide physical experiences. So I'm thinking back to your experience holding your infant son, and that was a physical experience you had. Does that resonate with you, that there may be aspects or levels of experience on the other side that are very much very physical, that not everything is just pure etheric on the other side.
Yeah, boy, I hope so, Jim. I really hope so. I mean, I have funny things happen to me, and this happened to me after having the experience. One day I was peeling an orange. I was going to have my lunch. I was peeling the orange, and I was overwhelmed with the thought that, wow, the ground, a seed fell into the ground somewhere or was planted, and Mother Earth had to nurture that seed, and then the clouds and the sky made rain and watered it, and it grew into a little seedling and then into a tree, and then the tree, by some miraculous things, sprung blossoms, and the bees came and pollinated the blossoms, and the blossoms manifested this fruit, and then some kind soul harvested it, picked it, probably at minimum wage somewhere, trying to make things work, and then it was put on a truck and brought to a store, and I was sitting here tearing up, peeling this orange, the miracle of it, and thinking, wow, and now I get to taste it. And there was this overwhelming love of the universe. I thought, wow, and the universe loves me that much, that all of this was done, that I could eat this orange, I could peel that little section out of it and taste it in my mouth. And I thought, oh, wow, this feels like those other realms. This is a physical experience, but I'm experiencing the physical at a heightened spiritual awareness. And gosh, I can't imagine, wow, what's it like to kiss your lover like that? Or to, I really hope that in those realms, it feels as physical as what I experienced with Griffin, my son. And when I say physical, it was, and I don't know the language, I don't know the words to use. It was beyond physical. It was so heightened and so experiential that I'll never forget that. That's where I have no fear of death. I'm like, gosh, what's it going to feel like to swim in the water in that heightened awareness? That's going to be something, right?
Yeah. Mark Brooks has a question for you. Mark, you want to chime in?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Jim. Jeff, I wanted to ask you a question. I was watching a couple videos that you had done in 2014, as we were preparing for this. And you talked about the power of love and how the love, or your love for your son, Spencer, kept you going, all those months that you were in the hospital. And you said you played Division I football. You were a very rough and tumble dad. But after the accident, when you came home a cripple. And when your son Spencer saw you, he didn't run up and hug you. He ran past you. Could you talk about how that made you feel and what he did?
Oh, gosh, Mark, thank you for bringing it up, because I'm going to expand on what happened. Yes, I was going home. And in fact, I wasn't even going to my own home. I had to go stay with my brother, and they had put in one of the spare bedrooms a hospital bed. I was still in a wheelchair. My leg was cut off on the left. So here I had this stump that was healing. My right leg was in a splint sticking straight out because they had attempted to repair the knee. My right arm was in a sling because they were working on the shoulder. All I could do is drive a little electric wheelchair with my one working left hand. And I couldn't get into the chair by myself. Nurses, or in this case, my brothers, literally had to lift me up and put me in the chair. And then they were emphatic that I learned to drive it myself. My brothers were incredible. They were about my independence. You've got to push forward through this. Anyway, Spencer, my son, who was only 7 at the time, was staying with my younger brother, and he was watching as the car pulled up. I was coming home to his house. The car pulled up, and there's Spencer looking out the window, and I'm seeing him, and and he had seen me in the hospital. He'd come to the hospital to visit, but now I was on. This was different turf. We were going to have to go to the grocery store, and what was that going to look like, right? And I was so concerned about how he was going to accept me. And he was looking out the window watching my brothers, his uncles, lift me, his dad, into the wheelchair. And he did come running out of the house. And just like you said, Mark, he ran right toward me and he ran right past me. And I thought, you know what? This is too much for him. He can't accept this. And I thought, well, I knew this. This is all the premonitions of how hard this was going to be for him. I had a big colostomy on my stomach, a colostomy bag. I mean, I was a mess. But I began to navigate my way in the electric wheelchair. This is where I'll expand on the story, to the ramp that my brothers had built so I could get into the house. And I looked over my shoulder just to see where Spencer was, my little 7-year-old. And he had actually run across the street. He had run past me to run across the street. And he was then knocking on all the doors, saying, come out, my dad has made it home. Come see my dad. And I mean, I thought, wow, all my judgments are not his. And I'm sharing this for a very specific reason. As he did that, he did finally come around, and he threw himself on my lap and put his arms around me, and it just about killed me because I still had all the sutures in from the abdominal repair. But he threw his arms around my neck, and I was explaining to him, look, I'm going to be like this a while. I'm going to be sick. I'm going to learn. He was a Star Wars nut. He still is a Star Wars nut. And I said, they're going to make a Darth Vader leg for me and teach me how to walk again. And I'm going to work on getting well, but it's going to be like this for a while. Are you going to be okay? And we still laugh about it. My son is now 30 years old and married. He's 6'2" and, taller. I look up at my son. And he said to me, Dad, if you were nothing but a puddle of blood, I would still love you. And I burst into tears. Here's why I share this. There I was in a wheelchair as a cripple, but there was my living son, my son that survived, throwing his arms around me, and suddenly heaven was right here. That was no less profound than going to the other realm and holding my son that had passed in the arms of God. I was holding my surviving son, and his unconditional love for me was as powerful as that of the divine. And I thought, wow, heaven is right here. There's nowhere to go. There's nothing to become. There's nothing to do but to be in this perfect moment and to enjoy the fact that we're having the experience and that love is the most powerful force in the universe. So yeah, thank you for being, I felt devastated when he ran past me. I felt absolutely enlightened when he came to me, and he's still one of the greatest inspirations of my life. This goes back to Stanley's question, I believe, and I'll be brief about this. I know I give long answers to very short questions. Spencer never had the experience. He lost his mother, he lost his little brother, he lost his dad in many ways, and he didn't have a near-death experience. He didn't have a dream. He didn't have a visitation. He didn't have a vision. He didn't have anything. In fact, he came to me as a young adult and said, Dad, I don't get it. You share these profound experiences you've had. I was a little boy. I prayed. I beat my knuckles bloody against that door you call God, asking, can I just feel my mom today? And he said, I got nothing. I got nothing. So either you're making it up and lying about it, or you're deceived in some crazy way. Because if there's some great power or some creator or some universe out there, it didn't care about me, as I begged every day to feel something. And I was gutted by this. I was like, wow. In fact, I still pray. I went home and I said to God, I said, you know what? I'll give it away. I'll give away all those experiences if you'll give my son something. And he was probably 19 or 20 years old at this time. I don't profess to talk to God every day, but I did get an answer this night. And when I was saying, I'll give it away, give him something, the answer I got was interesting, because God said to me, why are you judging your son? Judge not that you be not judged. Why do you think your experience is better than his? Why would you trade yours out for his, thinking that yours is the grander one to have? Don't you know that his path is perfect for him and your path is perfect for you, and they don't have to look alike? You can have a completely different experience, and that's the best for his soul's expansion. Yours is the best for your soul's expansion, and I've got you both. So don't judge his experience or him. You love him unconditionally and watch what happens. Anyway, I don't mean to get emotional about that stuff, but it was profound. he's become the most compassionate man I know. And he's actually said, hey, Dad, all this stuff you talk about, that never worked for me, but I'm going to be God's love. I'm going to be God's light. When people are struggling and they're not getting those answers or having the experiences just like I didn't, I'm going to be that guy they can come to, and I'll say, let's make it better now, here. He works with young traumatized kids. He's a musician. They play music as their therapy. He'll have a little band of 10-year-olds up on a stage cranking out Metallica, and he's like, Dad, that's their therapy. And I am God's love. I'm God's light, because the intangible sometimes doesn't work for a kid that's searching for comfort and answers. Anyway, I didn't mean to expand on that, but it's a beautiful thing, what you brought up, Mark, and how that has played out in 20 years of hindsight now.
Thanks.
I don't see any other hands raised. Would anybody like to just speak up? If you don't know how to raise your hand and you'd like to pose a question, you can unmute yourself and pose a question. There's been so much material here in listening, particularly the two of you talk, and you have to give a little thought to some of these things, because we have a tendency, I think, to focus on a purely human way of understanding things. We're so trained to judge things from a human perspective. If we could only understand how important spirituality, our spiritual being is, maybe we could gain a greater appreciation, a different way of seeing the trials and tribulations that we experience in this world. Daniel, I see you've raised your hand.
Thanks, Jim. Jeff, I just wanted to say thank you for this sharing.
Thank you. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you.
Daniel, I saw your daughter was that was sitting there with you earlier?
Our granddaughter, she's 5.5.
Okay, well, is she still there? Is she getting a chance to hear some of this stuff?
She listened a little bit, but I had to put her to bed. It's past her bedtime.
We have a new generation. I'm hoping that Jose and I have talked about this, that perhaps there's an awakening going on, that more and more people are listening to near-death experiences and realizing the breadth of who we are. And when you start, Ken Ring, in his book, one of his books, Ken Ring was a researcher in near-death experiences, and he used this term, benign virus. Have you heard that, Jeff? He said that for all those people who have not had a near-death experience, if you take the time to read these experiences and to understand them, you might catch a benign virus. You might be able to gain some appreciation that the near-death experiencer has gained through their experience. You can learn from their experiences and have a greater appreciation for who you are, and a greater appreciation for the life experiences you're having. So I kind of like that term, a benign virus.
A benign virus. I love that. And this might be a good thing to wrap up on. I mean, we've been through quite a pandemic in the world. I mean, it was a global, I've never seen anything in my lifetime that was so global and that changed things so quickly. I mean, it seems like it was announced, it wasn't 72 hours and all of a sudden we had quarantines and all kinds of travel restrictions. It was a pandemic. What if love was the pandemic? What if we could take what I've learned from the near-death experience of this love and this connection and this oneness. I love that, Jose, the oneness. Boy, how quickly could that spread among humanity? How quickly could that go and literally shift the way we live, the shift of our way of being? A benign virus, a virus of love, a virus of connection. That'd be the next pandemic I would hope for, and it wouldn't be a pandemic at all. It would actually be it'd be a lovely thing. That's for
Awakening.
sure.
And I just want to share one thing. The magic about what you're saying is that that seed is already there. We're that seed that's going to turn into that tree
It's
and
happening.
nourish others. So I think that it's that benign virus is a really cool concept.
Yeah.
It's happening. Thank you.
Well, everybody, this has been a fascinating evening. I really enjoyed sitting in the background listening to Jeff and Jose talk, and so much to learn in hearing these experiences. And thanks everybody for being here. Once again, remember next, let's see, it's Saturday that Robin Foy is going to be speaking. Visit the Consciousness-Cafe website to learn more about it. You can join the Consciousness Cafe meetup group, either the one in Charlotte or the one in Greensboro. It doesn't cost anything, and you will be given updates on these meetings, these events. So thank you everybody for being here. I hope you got some value out of it.
Thank you, guys. Jeff, love you guys.